But just a second about who we are, Intelligent Community Forum. We are two things. We were founded about 15 years ago by myself, by that gentleman back there, John Young, and another guy who's left back in New York named Lou Zaccarilla. We are right now a global network of about 160 cities and counties and metro regions around the world, all of whom are engaged in collaboration with each other over economic development and special projects of various kinds. We're also a think tank, because our original mission was to figure out how really, really smart places are using the technologies of today to improve their futures, to improve tomorrow. And so our mission in life is to study what they do, extract it into best practices and lessons, and share them as broadly as we can. We're a social enterprise. For some reason, we decided that was a good idea. There are currently, as I said, about 160 cities, metro areas, and counties in our network on all 5 continents. And what's interesting about our work, I think different from a lot of places, is that the population range. We believe very firmly that being an intelligent community doesn't have much to do with size. So we have, at the one end, communities of 15,000, and another end, cities of 8 million, all of whom we think are doing similar things, and all of whom can be learned from. And okay, so we're best known for the Intelligent Community Awards. They've been referenced already. They're our award program. It's fun. They're also our primary research project, because we give out awards and people give us information. It's a pretty fair trade, we think. And from that, we offer educational programs like our Community Accelerator, of which this is a part right here, me talking to you. We publish. We have now 2 institutes for the study of topics that we can't get to. Both currently in the US, but we're looking forward to announcing others soon. We're going to invite you all to join us in New York this June 6th through 8th for our annual summit. We're bringing it back to New York after a couple years away, I should say. And finally, our newest thing is ICF Nations. You are sitting in one of them. Our first one is ICF Canada. We have a separate organization here, again shared by my colleague John. We're looking forward early next year to announcing the second one of these. And these are places that just think the strategies that we're pursuing have not just local but also national implications. Okay, enough about us. In an age of digital disruption, which I think we live in, intelligent communities use those same tools, those digital tools, to build inclusive prosperity, to solve social problems, and to not trip over the chair and fall off the stage, and to enrich their cultures. Now, that's our elevator pitch. It's probably a little obscure to you, but hopefully by the time I finish, you'll know exactly what this means. Are they smart cities? Smart cities is a much better recognized term than intelligent communities. And we would say, yeah, of course they are. And so much more. So, we live in a time of revolution. And maybe people have always thought they lived in a time of revolution, but I think it's really, really true now. And it's not the kind where people storm the barricades following a woman who for some reason forgot to put on her shirt this morning. It's more like a flood. It's more like a rising flood coming silently underneath us until that nice piece of dry land we were standing on is a meter below water, and we can't remember which direction the high ground is. So what are the components of that revolution going on? Well, we live in challenging times. For quite some time, we've seen stagnant average incomes, and these are figures from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the 30 richest nations in the world. In the 10-year period from 2005 to 2014, 65 to 70% of households, 2/3 of them, belong to parts of the economic ladder, if you will, that saw their incomes either be flat or decline. And that compares with, from a prior period of about 12 years, 2% of households. So there's something very, very different going on. Income inequality, we all know about it, but it's really quite interesting. In the OECD, it's at the highest level of 30 years. And it's being driven by very strong gains at the top, which we all hear about, of course, but also by erosion of incomes, which I just mentioned, at the bottom 40% of our economies. And what we don't talk about enough is that this has a really measurable impact on economic growth. We wonder why growth is stagnant? That's why. Employment disruption. In 1990, the top 3 North American automakers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, did about $65 billion in sales, that's in 2015 dollars, and they employed over 1 million people. Well, today, the big top 3 digital companies, Apple, Facebook, and Google, do $1 trillion US in sales, and they use 137,000 people to do it. Quite a different world. And this problem of long-term unemployment. In this particular set of numbers, it's defined as being out of work for 6 months to a year. In the US in 2010, 2 years after the start of the financial crisis, we still had 46% of our unemployed were in that long-term category, which was twice the peak of the last recession, my own personal least favorite recession because it hit New York so hard. Canada, by the way, you guys are doing much better. You've got much more progressive policies, but they're in Europe, 50% long-term unemployed. Okay, a lot of numbers. And it can all be summed up as a tale of 2 economies, right? In one of those economies, people are doing really, really well, thank you. They're finding opportunity. They're seeing their standard of living rise. They're doing important work, and they're proud of what they do. In the other economy, we are finding none of that. So the question for our time is why? Why? Now, there's lots of reasons, because it's a big, big social change, so of course there's lots of reasons, but underlying it all, there is really one reason, and it is like that flood that is silently rising and taking the ground out from underneath us. In 1992, which is 24 years ago, every day, 100 gigabytes of data, which is a lot of data, moved across the world's network. So 100 gigabytes, right? Sounds big, and it was in 92. Today, on your laptop, you have that much space and more, without really breaking a sweat. In 2014, 2 years ago, every second, 16,000 gigabytes of data flowed across the world's networks. That's 23 million gigabytes a year. I don't even know how much that is. It's a lot. And I can guarantee you that you're not going to buy a laptop anytime soon with that kind of storage capacity. And in this broadband economy, as we call it, the broadband economy we live in, those gigabytes have been busy little fellas. 21% of all economic growth in the developed economies came from the internet from 95 to 2010. So if your economy is part of that internet economy, good for you. And if not, 1/5 of economic growth opportunity just went away for you. In 2008, and this is a US figure, the advertising-supported internet, that is the cute little bunnies that jump up and down on your screen to try to get you to click, and the banner ads and the text links, generated $444 billion US in 1 year in terms of added value. So it's huge. Again, if you're part of it, good. If you're not, you're missing something. In the US, again, and probably in Canada, every internet job supports about 1.5 more, which is good because the internet, as we know, also erodes employment in other sectors. And finally, for every job that is made obsolete, the internet creates 2.6 more, which is great news nationally. But of course, the problem is that at the community level, at the regional level, those new jobs are hardly ever created in the same places, in the same industries, and for the same people as the ones that have gone away. Okay. And looking forward, here's the kicker, looking forward a little bit. Those same technologies we're talking about are making possible an even bigger change. In 2001, 20% of the world's gross domestic product, that measure of all economic activity, was sold across international borders. And according to McKinsey, in a very short time, in 2027, 80% will be. So if you are part of an economy that's selling across international borders, bully for you. You got a nice shot, but if you're not, you have to kiss 80% of GDP growth away. Okay, numbers are valuable, but they don't always communicate. This does. This is Mosul, Iraq, 2014, and the guys on the screen, of course, are ISIS or Daesh or ISIL or whatever we want to call them this week. And in 2014, they swept across northern Iraq like a storm, and Mosul was really important to them. It's the place where their leader gave a sermon in which he declared the caliphate, which meant that they would get to run all the Muslim world someday, and of course, our world as well, regardless of what faith we may follow. So in that battle, 1,500 ISIS fighters armed with small arms, machine guns and the like, routed an Iraqi force of 25,000 troops armed with Abrams tanks and Black Hawk helicopters, courtesy of my tax dollars. What happened? What was their secret weapon? It was Twitter. Twitter was their secret weapon. As they closed on Mosul, they spammed Twitter with announcements of freshly conquered cities and the horrific images of what they did to the people who stood in their way. They distributed a smartphone app that let users link their own social media accounts to ISIS so that ISIS could post on their behalf. They basically built their own little Twitter botnet. And in a single day, a professor counted that botnet threw out 40,000 tweets. And it saturated the news media and created this very clear impression that northern Iraq was collapsing. And then, as so often happens in a digital world, perception became reality. The Iraqi troops already had very low morale for perfectly reasonable reasons, and they just bugged out. And they left behind huge quantities of weapons, ammunition, and supplies, including 2,300 Humvees, again, courtesy of my tax dollars. And now, of course, if you follow the news, you know they're having to fight to take it back again. So change is coming. Change has already come, and there's more of it on the way. And the question for all of us in the place that we live in, the place that we love, the place called home, is what we are going to do about it. Given how much we love and depend upon these gadgets, they're not going away, right? We're not going to slow the flood, and we're not going to turn the tidal wave in a new direction. But we can make choices for our communities and ourselves that will lift, if not all boats, more boats, and will ensure that those boats don't get swamped by the wave that's coming at us. Now, I get asked a lot about those two words we use, intelligent communities. You know, what does that mean? So I thought I'd just take a moment to talk about it. We all know what intelligence looks like. It's not usually this cute, but sometimes it is, if we're lucky. Recently, or in the past 10 years, psychologists and social scientists have begun talking about something else. They've begun talking about emotional intelligence. And what is that? Emotional intelligence is not just the ability to compute big numbers or think big thoughts in the privacy of your own head. It's the ability to engage with others in productive and rewarding ways, to have the opportunity to make something different and better together than we might have made it apart. Whether it's just a good time like these people are having or something of real importance. We think there's another level beyond it, and we call it community intelligence. And we believe it's about extending beyond just the people you can get into a room or around a table to work together with, but engaging an entire community around the idea of creating a better future. And I want to share a couple of examples with you, because that process has clearly started here in York region, and you're going to be accelerating as you go forward. This is the beautiful city of Stockholm, which in 2009 we named as our Intelligent Community of the Year, our top scoring one. And there were a lot of reasons for it. But one of the leading reasons was this thing, StokeHab. StokeHab was the innovative solution to a problem that Stockholm had had more than 20 years ago. And it's a problem very familiar to all of us. After years of state ownership of telecom, their problem was that they had a couple of big incumbent telcos that invested their money at a snail's pace because that was good for their business. That's what they should do. It's good for their business. In fact, somebody once explained the telco business model to me, and it goes like this. You dig a trench, and you bury a wire or a cable in the ground, and you cover it up. And 50 years later, you're still charging people to use it. That's a great model. What a model. I wish I had one of those. But Stockholm decided it wasn't the right model for its 800,000 citizens. And so starting with the business district, they built an open access fiber network. And what that means is that just as though you build a road and you put some stoplights on it, and you own the road as the city, and you maintain the road, and you run the stoplight network, nonetheless other people are driving on it, same idea. They built the fiber infrastructure, they maintain it, they lit it up, as they say, and they delivered what's called the transport layer, but somebody else, other service providers, did everything else. So What's important about this is that they reduced the cost of entering the market by up to 80%. That's what telcos usually spend to build out a network. 80% of their costs are just digging trenches and stringing cables. Instead, any new provider could come in and just hook up their gear to the StoCab network and go to market. So over time, they grew the network. They covered more organizations. They covered apartment buildings, private homes. It's now well over 90% of the city, and they're going to get to 100. It's going to take a while. There's always those hard places to get to. It's cash flow positive. The city's investment has paid back in lease payments from communications carriers. Most important, when they started the network 20 years ago, they had 3 carriers. Last time I checked, they have over 140 on the network. And you can imagine what that competition does for prices and performance. It gives them some of the best broadband on the planet, and they have used that to build one of Europe's hottest startup cultures and hottest technology hubs far to the north where the sun don't shine for 6 months a year. Obviously, it's a good place to be. And I call that an example of community intelligence because it took not just one organization, not just 2 organizations. It took a community to really solve a problem that nobody individually was going to solve. It took government, it took institutions, and it took the will of the voters to make investments that would change the market in ways that were good for Stockholm and not just for private interests. By the way, I forgot to say at the beginning, I love to be interrupted. So if you say, well, wait a minute, just do this. I'll try to see you. Let me take you around the world. Oh, that's going the wrong way. Let's go forward. Forward, always forward. Let's go around the world to another place called Tsinshu, which you probably have never heard of. It was one of our top 7 intelligent communities in 2014. And though you've probably never heard of it, the chips and maybe the motherboard of your PC, your laptop, your tablet, and your phone probably came from there. And I'll talk about why in a minute. One of the reasons they made our top 7 list actually had nothing to do with that, though. It had to do with this thing, the resident card. And there I am with the then mayor getting a very large card that I could never figure out how to get in my wallet. But nonetheless, I was the proud owner of it. We all carry a lot of cards, right? We all carry, in addition to our credit cards and our debit cards, we carry ID cards and transit cards and discount cards and frequent flyer cards and on and on. So in Tsinshu, this card takes the place of a lot of those. It's the senior discount card, it's the special needs card, it's a transit card, it's a student ID, it's a government ID, it's for many corporations, including some of their biggest, it's the employee ID. Okay. Each card has an embedded chip in it. Each chip is read by something called a near-field scanner. No information is stored on that card itself. That just talks to the cloud and pulls down your information. Got to have a big, powerful network to make that work. Users can load money onto the card, which parents love because they can auto-deposit little sums of money into their kids' cards, and the kids go off to the convenience store and buy the sugary, terrible things that they shouldn't have, which is fine because Taiwan has more convenience stores per capita than any other nation in the world. I have no idea why. But it's just one of those strange statistics. So you can put money into it. You can deliver social subsidies. So if I'm standing at the counter and I'm a poor person and I'm standing next to a guy who pulled up in a Mercedes and we both flash our resident cards, you can't tell who's who. You remove stigma. So it's a great way to deliver social subsidies to people. And they get retailers involved and malls that have, come in today, flash your card and we'll give you 15% off. Okay, that's nice. Why on earth would the city have put all this effort into this card? Why does it matter? Well, 2 things. One is data. Every time that card gets used, they get another data point, and they use that data to run the city better, to decide where the buses ought to go, where bike routes go, how are the stores doing, who needs some help. They're getting a constant flow of the heartbeat of Tsinshu in from that resident card. But the other thing that I loved about this example was, I mentioned the microchips, right? The chip manufacturers. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the company that built the fab model, the first one, and is still a huge manufacturer. That's where they are in Tsinshu. And they're in this thing called Tsinshu Science Park, which for most of its existence was an island inside that city. It didn't touch that city except for the wages it paid. which is not unusual, right? It's not unusual. I flew here from Newark International Airport, Port Newark, are part of a city that's in terrible trouble in the Northeast. Huh? How does that work? How does that work? So the mayor really wanted to connect the two. He actually had a wall broken down that separated the science park from the city, and he involved the businesses there in developing things like the resident card to bring the benefits of technology to the people, and that's community intelligence, involving the local tech community in helping to solve a problem in ways that make sure the whole city sees the benefits of technology. Okay, let's look at a place that you may be a bit more familiar with, the York region. Now, in the past couple of years, this region has been working to deliver on the broadband strategy that it launched back in 2014. That was a big step. It was a big step because it's a step on the road to doing one of the hardest things imaginable, which is to take 9 separate municipal authorities with their own agendas and their own needs and try to get them to work together and think as one. It's really difficult. It's really difficult, but it's well worth doing. And more steps followed, including your Vision 2051, all aimed at one goal, which is to help this region to the east of that big shiny city over there that begins with a T, to punch above its weight. You've got obviously pockets of tremendous prosperity and energy here, and then you have other things, and you want this whole region to come together and punch above its weight. So that broadband strategy has a lot of valuable moving parts that I've acquainted myself with, from York Telecom Network, community Wi-Fi, low-cost housing, then bringing in the big guns, the Orion network, making sure it terminates here, building your own mini Orion to power research and development, all really valuable things. But what I want to do in the next few minutes is to lift our eyes above those details and to focus on where this is all going. Why is this worth doing? It's really hard to keep your eye on the prize, but I think it's worth doing. And the why is this: it's the future. I don't think anybody in this room is here today for today. You are here for tomorrow, right? So let's talk about what tomorrow could look like. Well, let's talk about that. There you go. This is a good place to get an idea, believe it or not. This is Mitchell, South Dakota, USA. It is located in flyover country. Yes, it really is flyover country. It's in a region that's lost 30% of its employment base over the last 30 years. It is also home to the brave number of 15,000 people in the middle of the South Dakota plains. So why is it a good place to learn? Well, it's been a top 7 intelligent community. It's also home to this building, the famous Corn Palace, which tells you a great deal about the economy of the place, or at least the economy as it used to be. So as you work to leverage this broadband project you're working on, it's kind of interesting to watch what happened here and how their fiber to the premise network, which they didn't succeed in building, changed everything. And let's see if the video will play.
In the late 1990s, a high-speed fiber network was installed, connecting every home, office, and business in Mitchell. It wasn't without obstacles, but the vision and perseverance of community leaders paid off, and it wasn't long before big things started happening in this small town. We've used that connectivity to reach out to the world with one of North America's best and fastest broadband systems. Our efforts have ensured our stability and viability, and we continue to look to the future. All of Mitchell's school children have access to fiber-fast connections in every classroom. Students as young as kindergartners participate in our public K-12 one-to-one program, putting a tablet or laptop in the hands of every one of our enrolled students. Yes, every single student. You see, when your population is not as big, the possibilities are. Technology is being adopted by our youngest citizens at an early age, and they in turn bring it into the household. Multiple broadband providers here in Mitchell mean that there are lots of affordable options for high-speed internet. And again, that's to every home in Mitchell. In fact, there are 3 types of broadband to every doorstep in Mitchell: DSL, coax-based internet, and fiber to the premises. Our higher education institutions also took advantage of the network capabilities. Both Dakota Wesleyan University and Mitchell Technical Institute offer unique educational options both on campus and at a distance. In fact, Mitchell Tech is a leader in bringing technology to the farm with its Precision Technology program. Young men and women are learning how to take advantage of GPS and GIS systems to maximize production. Previously wasted ground is being brought into production. Computers help with planting, cultivating, and harvesting, and Mitchell is at the forefront, training the technicians who will help feed the world. Our regional healthcare provider, Avera, has a strong presence in Mitchell. With their 13,000 employees statewide, they've been early adopters of leading-edge e-medicine technologies. They're saving lives and making a difference. Emergency medical services personnel even use technology to connect with our local emergency department while still at the scene of an injury, accident, or other crisis. These e-medicine technologies are advancing the standard of care in all rural areas and changing what it means to have healthcare access. Our small size also means access of a different sort. We're fortunate to be able to reach our elected officials with just a phone call or two. And because we're small, federal support and cooperation has an even bigger impact on our community.
Mitchell being one of the top 7, and that's a great tribute to this community, and it doesn't happen by chance. It happens because there are a lot of good people who work hard to make it that way.
A thriving business sector has developed with hundreds of local jobs in the tech industry. Through software development, engineering services, and communications consulting, these businesses are the ones wiring rural areas around the world. Having a robust fiber network is critical to the work they do. Sorry, just kidding. Buffering, loss of signal, those things don't happen in Mitchell. We've got gigabit speeds to every home in the city.
That was cute, wasn't it? I liked it when he did that thing. He mentioned at the beginning that they faced some obstacles. Yeah, they faced some obstacles. They put together a big plan, put it in front of the voters, and the voters turned it down. It's an obstacle. But this Mitchell Technical Institute you saw there said, we don't care. So they started building out infrastructure. They got a great local exchange carrier who said, I'd like to help you. And then we had our broadband stimulus funding. They grabbed a piece of it, and vavoom, they got off and running. I like this example because this is the middle of nowhere. I mean, to most of us, right? Most of us who live in an urban area, they didn't care. They're now the hub of they're now their own hub of a region, of a regional economy. And it's a very exciting story to me. So let's try to step up and envision, he said. Come on, hit the right button. Here we go. Let's try to envision for a moment the future of the York region, right? The future of the York region. And to do that, I think it's actually instructive to look to the other side of that big shiny city that begins with a T, because there's some lessons to be learned, not that you're going to imitate, but some patterns you might see that would be useful to you as you step forward. Of course, there is Toronto, which was our Intelligent Community of the Year in 2014. There is Waterloo in the Kitchener area. I was very amused when I did the Google map. You couldn't even find Waterloo because it had a small population. And then farther west, you got to this little place called Stratford. Now, you may think you know all these places. They're all intelligent communities of various kinds. Waterloo is a 2007 Intelligent Community of the Year. Stratford's a many-time top 7 intelligent community. And you've got Toronto, the shining city on the lake. You've got Waterloo, the big tech hub. You've got Stratford, that quaint little place with its Shakespeare Festival. But underneath the headline stories, there is a very deep web of connections. And I think that's what I want you to pay attention to. That's perhaps the lesson for the York region. Central to it is an institution of learning, University of Waterloo, very famous. You guys hardly need be told about it. Founded by 2 business executives who got sick and tired of the fact they could hire graduates who knew lots of stuff but couldn't actually do anything. And so they wanted a university that trained people to do things, and they succeeded. One of the things that made them different was they came up with this intellectual property policy that was really unique for the time, and I think still is. If you're a faculty there or a student there and you invent something, you create something, it's yours. University doesn't want to own it. University doesn't want to license it. University just wants you to do something with it. And that decision, though it in some ways seems crazy, is what made it possible for this little company, this little place, to give birth to a whole range of companies that are really, really well known now. Companies that, yes? Excellent. Congratulations. You just won a very important prize that's going to make a huge difference to your future, and probably already is. Yes, it does. It's about the future, not about how much money I can squeeze out of you today. And what's interesting about this, these companies stayed where they were born, right? And they expanded there. And when one of those companies, boy, that background's supposed to be a lot less visible than that. When one of these companies got into terrible trouble, BlackBerry, and had to lay off thousands of engineers, what would normally happen is it would be a rout, right? Everybody would leave town. But the engineers didn't want to leave town, and as it turns out, they didn't need to, because the North American technology industry came to Waterloo, opened offices, and said, we want the talent. And I cannot imagine a more powerful endorsement of an intelligent community than that your people are so good that the world needs to have them and they're willing to do almost anything to get them. So that tech cluster there is a pretty impressive thing, but it didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen by itself. The city government got involved. The city government found ways to support what was happening. It helped found the Waterloo Accelerator Center. It supported the growth of this Communitech network, right, which connects tech workers, helps them grow their skills, incubates, accelerates their businesses, finds them new opportunities locally and globally. Okay, so nice. You got a really strong innovation economy going on there. Again, not by accident. So let's go a little farther west and look at this really little place, Stratford. Of course, the Shakespeare Festival, right? We know about that. It's the town's biggest employer, employs 1,000 people in the season, biggest taxpayer, biggest revenue generator. The funny part about it is that it's the result of a crazy-ass economic development scheme from the 50s, where they actually convinced the premier theater director of the day, Tyrone Guthrie, to open a Shakespeare festival on the banks of the Avon River and bring along, Alec Guinness to open the season. For those of you under 40, the original Obi-Wan Kenobi, okay. He did a couple things before that, but don't worry about it. Okay, so in addition to the festival, they're sitting in the middle of a great farm belt, so farming, agriculture is a big, big business. They've got light manufacturing, mostly for automotive. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture? Excuse me? No digital infrastructure. That's a good, yes, but that wasn't the question I'm looking for. Teachers always have an answer they're looking for. Anybody else? Well, the festival makes money, let's count. 4 or 5 months a year. Farming costs money all year, but it makes money, 4 or 5 months a year. How are you going to build a robust, growing economy if you're entirely seasonal? It can't be done. And we know it can't be done because it isn't done. So they set out in Stratford to do something about that particular problem, right? How do they do it? They have a municipal electric utility, Festival Hydro, that built itself a network called Rhizome, and its CEO is going to be up on this stage talking about that, so I'm not going to. But suffice it to say, it's fiber, it runs to a lot of places. What I want to focus on are its impacts, right? Sorry? The Google car. The Google car. Frightening thought, but anyway, yes, the Google car. Impacts include tourism, right? Tourism is always going to be important to Stratford because they got the festival, they've got the bed and breakfast, they got the restaurants that all come along with it. That's nice. The problem is that except for the festival, tourism is 100 little mom and pop businesses that really can't, reach very far or do very much because they don't have the capital. They're just getting through the month, the year. So these guys founded something to take care of that. They funded, the city funded with a lot of private sector, the Stratford Tourism Alliance. And the Stratford Tourism Alliance is a public-private deal that creates programs and conducts online marketing for its member businesses. So instead of a bunch of little mom and pops trying to desperately chase tourists, they have a 3-week summer music festival. They have a garlic festival, which must be very smelly. They have a Blues and Ribs Fest, which has its own problems. They have a Winter Fest. They built themselves an app, a mobile app that is a single on-ramp to book anything in town. So suddenly, a bunch of little businesses are functioning like a multinational. They're marketing across borders. Tourism revenues reached a record of $200 million in 2010 and are still climbing. And none of that happens without that rhizome network underneath it all. Right? So again, taking what you're already good, one of the things we believe very passionately at the Intelligent Community Forum is taking what you're already good at and leveraging it using these technologies. That's the power. That network was also critical in bringing a $400 million data center for RBC to the town. And how on earth did this little place win that? Well, they had the network. They did some great stuff in terms of electric power, but they just worked hard to beat out 200 other sites. Huge investment of time and resource, 80 new jobs. You have to say, was that smart? Well, probably yes, because it signaled the development of a completely new economy. That future took remarkable form with the opening of the University of Waterloo's Stratford campus. See, it turned out that the University of Waterloo, for all of its power, really knew it needed to do something in digital media because it's, remember that $440 billion, that's basically digital media spending. But they didn't know quite how. They didn't have the picture together. And Stratford got wind of that and said, oh, we have an idea. We have this thing called the festival. Why don't you locate your campus right here in downtown Stratford? We even have some empty land you can do it on. The festival, of course, pumps out creative content all the time, perfect for digital media projects. It has a huge need to digitize physical stuff that it already has so that it can market it around the world. And of course, without the network, you don't do anything in digital media. So some deal making commenced. $10 million on the table from the city. They donated a $5 million piece of land, which was sitting vacant, by the way, and not kind of derelict. 10 million from the province, the feds put in 5, Open Text put in 10 million. And that's really important because the digital media curriculum is basically about projects, and so they have now 20 private sector companies and institutions involved in those projects with students who split their time between Waterloo and Stratford. $40 million total, big number for a little place like this. 10 years to put the deal together. But it's pumping out, millions every year in terms of economic impact for the place. And then finally, being kind of clever, these guys, they're all the exciting kids. It's a really cool place if you haven't been there. After all, what good is it to have a campus for a university on here if the kids graduate and leave you and you don't get to see that economic benefit? So they went down the road to their friends in Waterloo and said, you know how to run an accelerator center, come here and help us. And so they set up the Stratford Accelerator Center. A local entrepreneur owned a building. He refurbished it at his own cost so that he could get some rent out of it. He made it available to startups. Of course, the Accelerator Center focuses on digital media. Right. So now, once again, what have they done? In Stratford, little Stratford, they've consciously reproduced what they saw in Waterloo to create what we call an innovation ecosystem on a very small scale, right? But it's working. And of course, Waterloo is kind of doing what happens naturally in an enormous city like Toronto. They're doing it again, consciously. None of this happens by accident. Not the Shakespeare Festival, not the network, the Tourism Alliance, the data center, the digital media campus, the accelerator center. None of it happens by accident. Each thing is built with great effort. Each thing takes advantage of assets that were already there and then takes a couple of chances that might seem risky, but are well thought out and can't get us in too much trouble. And ultimately, that means that a little place gets to have its share, or more than its share, of the high-tech growth in the province of Ontario. And my favorite part about the story, and the one that I think is also relevant to York Region, is that all of it took place without sacrificing what people love about living in Stratford. You can still go there and just see the quaint little town and the Shakespeare Festival and the geese and the restaurants. But they also have this high-tech economy powering away, right? And so they've got a wonderful place to live, tremendous quality of life, and yet they have created an opportunity for their young people not to leave town at the end of their education, but to stay there and to build tomorrow. I can tell you from 15 years of watching intelligent communities develop that the same thing absolutely can happen here. In this very diverse region, again, with 9 different municipalities, each with its own their own strengths, their own concerns, their own futures, their own heritage. But it does require the region to work together in new ways. It requires you to look beyond the nuts and bolts of broadband networks and optical fiber and wireless towers. You need to ask the fundamental question why the York region is the best place to live and work and raise a family and produce the next generation. I don't know of any other definition of the future that really matters. Because community intelligence, interestingly enough, is not about ultimately the network, the broadband network. It's not about the gadgets. It's not even about the entrepreneurs and the innovators that you want so badly to take root here and spread throughout the region, not just all be focused in this little corridor next to Toronto. It's about the attitude. It's about the environment you create, the ecosystem of the community. Shared not by everyone, we'd love it to be shared by everyone, but shared by enough to make a big difference to the community. When we study intelligent communities, what we find is that they have attitudes. They have attitudes that we can recognize over and over again. First of all, they are open. They are open. At a time when we fear the stranger and we want to put up walls to protect ourselves, they lean the other way. They welcome the outsider. They value new ideas as much as they treasure their traditions. They know that success comes not from circling the wagons, but from connecting with the world. They are optimistic. As a confirmed pessimist myself, I find it miraculous, but there it is. They are optimistic. They know how tough it is to change our ways. They know what a difficult road any new innovation has to travel to succeed, and so many of them don't succeed. But they approach each challenge with the confidence that something of value will emerge from it. Something. Maybe not what we planned, but something of value will emerge from it. And of course, it so often does when you approach it with that attitude. They are committed. And I don't mean they need to be committed, although sometimes it looks that way. They are committed, and they don't let good intentions dissolve into endless rounds of what if this and what if that, and let's have a pilot project and let's do another study. They just don't let that kind of thing happen, and they don't let setbacks derail them. And because they're not just committed to a project or a thing, they're committed to making the place called home better for everybody. And they're collaborative. They're collaborative. They know that something as complex and human as a community is never transformed by the actions of one organization or one person. What I do or you do is far less important than what we persuade someone else to do, or that we let someone else persuade us to do, because when we collaborate, we become strong. So these are the things that intelligent communities do to turn technology change, which is such a disruptive force, right? Such a disruptive force in our lives, into growth, into solutions for social problems, into cultural richness, into community. So, what is the future of the York region? Well, that's up to you. It's easy for me to stand here and talk, but it's up to you. It's what you will make together, not for yourselves alone, but most of all for those who will follow you. I think the future of the York region is to become an intelligent community, perhaps one day to be named as our Intelligent Community of the Year, like that big shiny city to the west was named in 2014, like Waterloo was named in 2007. It can happen here. Why not? All it really takes is for all of you to think it can. Thank you. I stole your thing there.
All right, I would love to open up the floor to any questions. That would be for Robert Bell. That would be, I know there's some bubbling up in there. So I know you spend time in Canada, but it's not unusual for it to be a little quiet at first.
Oh, that's fine.
We're a very conservative bunch, and then when
Polite.
the floodgates open, then everybody's going, oh.
You're very polite until,
That's right.
unless it's hockey. Sir.
Hi, good morning. Very nice presentation, by
Thank
the
you.
way. I guess mine is more of a comment, and I'd ask for you to comment on this as well. One of the problems is actually a fundamental mindset. that people have, because you look at how fiber optic communications and high-speed networks and all those things are affecting the environment. The problem is that always in our history, there's been a revolution and then a steady state. And the problem is that this particular revolution doesn't bring a steady state. What it does is it creates an agile, continuously adaptive environment going forward. So for the people in this room, the key thing is you're not going to reach a point where all of a sudden everything just kind of settles down and it's business as usual, only in a different environment. This is the future, constant adaptation. And I just would like you to comment a little bit on that.
That's a really keen observation. I still struggle with that, actually. You know, I keep thinking, all right, fine, now we got it. Yeah, no, we don't. Yeah, right? We have to get used to being uncomfortable. We have to become accustomed to being just a little uncomfortable all the time. And nobody likes change. Mark Twain, our author in the United States, had this great line he wrote. He said, "I'm all for progress. I'm all for progress. It's change I can't stand." That's it. And the trouble is that we are in a time of continuing change. By the way, the next time anybody tells you that change is becoming exponential, tell them that they don't know much about mathematics. No, it's not. It's just there's a lot of it all going on at the same time. And last comment, and then I'll please have somebody else talk. One of the things I think it's very important to be aware of right now is it's not that so much more is going on, it's that you can't avoid knowing about it. Because you're connected to everybody on the planet with these digital devices, and so you have this flood of what looks like change happening all the time that really gets you kind of crazy. Well, it's always been going on. We just didn't know about it before. So instead of taking it all so seriously, remember that it's always been this bad. I read a lot of history, and it's always been this bad. We just know more about what is bad that's going on, or good. Somebody else? Thoughts, comments? Hey, you gonna let these guys do it all? Come on.
There's something about that table. It's all right.
We talked ahead of time, so.
You're
Doug
the shills, I see. I didn't know that. Okay.
Doug McCullough, City of Dublin, Ohio, and I'm going to be speaking later a little bit about this. And we have a
Top 7 Intelligent Community.
Yep, we have thank you. We have a fairly close relationship with ICF, and as we talk about a region potentially winning some of the top awards, the award system of the ICF is very unique. And I guess our question in Ohio, you may be aware we're interested in establishing an Intelligent Ohio, potentially the first ever intelligent state. Does the ICF have the means to measure such a thing? You may have a region where you have 9 partners, but not 100. There are gaps within that. How will the ICF approach that? Because this is something we're pushing the ICF on. It's not something you came up with. It's an innovation that your winners are beginning to bubble up, and we all need to work together to figure out how to even define that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, but I think I better start thinking about it. No, thank you, and I love what you just said. This is Dublin is the site of our second institute for the study of the intelligent community, and they're making. You just heard what their objective is. The short answer is we came up with this word community very deliberately because we wanted to be a bit vague about the boundaries, right? Sometimes it's a city, sometimes it's a metro area, sometimes it's a county. They're all communities, by which I mean they have an identity, they work together, they identify each other as members, right? When you get to the point of a state, yeah, that's going to be hard to reproduce. All I can tell you is we'll figure it out. We'll adapt and figure out how you can measure what's going on in a state, which can't possibly be the same as what goes on in a community. But I think we know enough to get there with your help.
We have another question in the corner. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. As one of the 9 municipalities that we're trying to move forward here in York Region, one of the things is trying to overcome the build it and they will come syndrome. So moving forward, putting a fiber network, and then doing a business plan, trying to quantify what the benefit will be is a real challenge. Can you comment on that?
From what, I'm sorry, from what, okay, business plan, from what point of view? You're going to spend some public-private funds to put in infrastructure and you're trying to figure out what the payback will be. Okay, well, Yeah, I mean, I think, again, what's your source of funds? Your source of funds are the carriers who are going to ride in the network. Would that be correct? What's the source of funds on that? Or sorry, or what? Public. Well, public funds gets you capitalized, but I'm talking about the payback you need. It comes from your ongoing running revenue, right? So presumably, if you're going to, presumably the governments here don't want to build a monopoly that runs all the communications. I'm going to start from that point. So if that's true, then what's your source of revenue? Your source of revenue is companies that are going to jump on that network and run it. And I think you can look at other examples from other places. You can talk to the folks in Dublin who built a network for that purpose. Be happy to introduce you to half a dozen cities that have had this experience and say, okay, how does it work? When do you get payback? I actually think it's a fairly simple business problem. It just requires thinking differently.
Or not the payback of the actual entity, but the economic development of the community.
Ah, okay. Yeah, see, yeah. There's a thing called the Strategic Networks Group, is a consultancy that does that. I don't know whether I believe in their methodology, but they will give you some great hard figures. It's a Canadian company, SNG. Will actually do that analysis for you and give you a number that you can wave at people and say, this is what we're going to get back out of it. I don't yet know how well they've tested that against reality, but yeah, people can do that for you. It's a planning discipline. The short form to me is, it's not going to work. When was the last time you built a road or anything else and it didn't produce some economic benefit? I don't know when. I mean, I'm sure you can do it if you run the road to nowhere, but. And again, the other issue, by the way, is never, ever, ever decide you're going to build the whole thing at once. So Stockholm did a study after 20 years of that network I described, StoCab, and they discovered that it had had $2 billion in net economic benefit to the city over that period of time. But they didn't build the whole thing saying, oh, goody, we're going to get $2 billion. They built it in their central business district. And then they made that cash flow positive, and then they kept going. So it's risk mitigation is an important part of it as well. If you can make this work and you prove it, then you can probably make this work, and on and on. So I hope that's useful, sir.
If I may add on to that, I think clearly in your talk, it's not just technology that's empowering these intelligent communities, but I think there's this fear when we do talk about underlying infrastructure to future-proof your communications. I think there's this underlying fear of obsolescence. Technology evolves at such a rapid pace that whether you're dealing with public funds and the outcry for misspent money from taxpayers or private funding, we don't want to bet on the wrong horse. So is there a way, and perhaps with Stockholm as an example, to have an iterative approach to the technology, the underlying technology of an intelligent community?
Well, yes, and that's the way to think about it. I once had a council member in a very small place somewhere say, I don't want to be the guy who gets the call when we put that tower up on a hill and it fails. Mm-hmm. I said, that sums it up pretty well. Yeah, well, first of all, fiber optics, which is what you're talking about, is so far in its entire history been a no-fail solution because it's just a piece of glass and you can get it to be more powerful by switching out what's on either end of it. So 80% of the cost is putting it in the ground. Once it's there, it's really flexible. Wireless towers for other places. Again, you're going to put up a tower, you're going to bring power and a connection to it, and you're going to ask carriers to hang their radios on it. Not much is going to go wrong with that, whether we're doing 3G, 4G, or someday 5G. You're always going to need that. So I think mostly it's just scary. It's just scary because we don't know what it looks like. And it's really, we know the voters don't really know what it looks like, and they're ultimately the boss. So the caution is justified, but courage is required. Sir.
I think there's a follow-up question.
No, actually, I just have a comment on the other gentleman's, if I may contribute. One of the biggest things that you can do for risk mitigation actually is just prioritize your community and try to assess where the biggest impact happens. So if you're looking at the municipal environment or MDUs, or whether you're looking at certain business sectors, and as you mentioned, if you prioritize those areas, build them up properly, and get some early successes there, then you start branching out from there. The problem is that as politicians and representing your entire community, you have a lot of outlying areas that are very difficult to reach, even if there are some businesses there, or perhaps a large office building in the middle of nowhere that somebody put there because it was very inexpensive land to build on, but now you can't reach it. with telecommunications. So first of all, fiber optic network isn't the only methodology for getting out there. You can use Wi-Fi, direct beam, all that stuff. But the other part of it is if you have success in the small areas, start building on that. I think that's your clearest roadmap and best mitigator. Sorry.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, we have one right here. We have a microphone handy. The center table, please. Thank you.
We must all realize that in Canada we are working from a somewhat different base than we are in many other countries of the world in terms of who owns the spectrum. We have a monopoly in Canada. Whether you all sit around and think that we have competition, get that out of your mind. We still have weak leadership in terms of innovation at the federal level. You elect them, but we've really gone nowhere. We still have 92% of every community in this country covered by 3 people. In this particular area of Canada, you're down to 2. Hopefully, you're looking forward to Shaw coming in and revitalizing wind. But if you're municipal people, you've got to start thinking of communications as your 4th utility. It's the most critical thing you have. You cannot sell it off or hope that somebody's going to come along and put wire up and down your streets and everything else. You've got to get involved. It's just as important as electricity. Taking the garbage out, it's probably a more important element today than anything else you have in your community. You're not going to bring industry. Companies are not going to come in from foreign countries. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to get out their phone, as I saw a gentleman do the other day, and he said, "Oh, 2 bars, we not go here." That was his attitude. So that's the world that we live in Canada, and I think it's time that we stop thinking that someone else was going to solve the problem. We're going to solve the problem. Talk about community intelligence.
And that is the spirit of community intelligence. And I'll leave you with this thought just to back you up, sir. There was a poll done in the United States a few years ago asking Americans what they could least stand to live without. And it turns out that asked to choose between chocolate and sex and the internet. Guess which one topped the list of the things they could least afford to do without? Sorry, something wrong, deeply wrong with us is all I can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.